just looking at the pipelines and looking at emissions, pipelines represent, in terms of methane emissions and so on, and the whole life cycle of pipelines, a very tiny, tiny, tiny amount of emissions. Like, for example, compressor stations on the gas side primarily will run on natural gas, and they have emissions, but they're converting to electricity. So the use of natural gas in compression is being phased out over time. So the footprint of that particular emissions piece is shrinking. The other side of, and that's something that's not really understood, that we are actually doing these things. It's like we're not being portrayed as not doing these things, but we are. We are very, very aggressively doing that. The other operational things used to be that when you have a piece of, in the case of natural gas, if you're going to needed to work on a piece of pipe, you had to isolate it, and they used to flare to get the gas out of the pipeline to work on it. But now their operating procedures and so on, and the way things are operated, they're able to minimize and not just vent the natural gas in the atmosphere. So these are minor things, but they make good business sense, and they do represent what the industry is doing to reduce emissions. So we are on the forefront of that, and we are cognizant of that. The safety and the environmental impact of the pipelines, on the oil side and the gas side, new technologies. There's a tool that goes inside the pipe called a pig, and it's just basically has all kinds of sensors inside of it, and it takes readings and defines the integrity of the pipe as it goes through. That has increased dramatically. The ability to take that data and crunch that data and find problems and be able to get more of a predictive mode. We are on an ongoing basis getting better and better and better on the integrity aspect of pipelines. So I would say those are 2 or 3 of the biggest misconceptions on the narrative. Well, the alternatives for, let's just focus on the products. For natural gas, you can compress and put natural gas on a truck, but if you can't move, 4 trillion cubic feet of gas on trucks. That's just infeasible. Infeasible, unfeasible, not feasible. So you just can't do that. The other alternative for moving liquids and moving oil is rail. And rail has had all kinds of controversy around, Lac Mégantic and so on. Those events are, historic and tragic and so on. But, rail is safe also in its own way. Each mode of moving these products is done in a safe manner, but each mode creates different risks and different ways of dealing with it. So I think that's really, really the issue. There really is no other alternative to move the just mind-boggling amounts of energy that we move other than pipelines. The rail system can't do it. It's a stop. It's an outlet when transportation capacity gets tight. It's safe in its own way. And on the gas side, there's just no other alternative. And if you move to hydrogen, you can truck hydrogen in a very local situation. But again, if you're going to make a big splash with hydrogen in the energy portfolio, you need pipelines. An excellent question. Thank you for that. The energy security piece and why pipelines are so critical for that is just we need to have access to energy. We need to have secure access to energy. If I was sitting in Europe and depending on Russia to supply me gas, I think I'd be a little antsy about that. But If you're getting your supply from Canada, that's a little bit different. But we do have energy security. We don't have energy poverty. I mean, the energy potential of, you know, Alberta, the Western Basin, is enormous. We're probably running in second gear in terms of what it could be going forward. So energy security is a key issue. Pipelines connect the economy to the source of energy. So they, you know, Canada's blessed because we saw on that map, we have a massive integrated system that delivers energy continentally. So that in itself is security. The other part of pipelines is that the vast majority of times, if there's an environmental event like a tornado or a flood or anything like that, pipelines are very resilient. You can bring a pipeline down and bring it back up, or can keep running for you know, we're not disparaging electricity, but you know, when the electricity lines go down, you're done. You've got to. It's going to take a lot of work, but you know, the vast majority of the times, the pipeline infrastructure keeps operating, keeps delivering the energy. So that resiliency is important in the security aspect of it. It's fundamental. The first stop to answer that question is on the regulatory system. Is that in any jurisdiction you have a regulatory framework that does several things. It sets out, you know, the engineering and technical aspects of what the pipeline needs to be to do what you want it to do. So that's very tightly scoped, and it's you know, world class in that aspect of it. It also addresses how the pipeline gets built, you know, where it gets placed, how the construction of the project goes forward, and then ultimately the, you know, the testing and the examination before it goes into service. So all of those things are taken into account. And the third aspect of that is on consultation. You know, there is, back to your earlier question, you know, the narrative, well, they don't consult, they just go and do whatever they do. Well, it's not the case. There is a strong desire by the companies, and there's a strong emphasis on the regulatory side to make sure that when you have a project or you're doing anything, even when you're going to inspect along the right of way, that you consult with the people that are affected by that. And there's hearings, there's data, there's the ability to monitor, and that's not just in the construction; it's through the life cycle of the project. I mean, it's not you build a pipeline and then you say, okay, I'll see you later in a couple of decades. No, that's not the case. Communities are engaged in the ongoing operation of the pipeline and providing services. Communities benefit from these things. So it's a whole package of, you know, the engineering standards, how you build these things. And these projects, by the way, are built because they make sense. The companies are just, hey, let's build a pipeline to, you know, somewhere because we think that would be cool. No, there's a market. There has to be a market for the energy. So the pipelines are built based on the market need. So that part of it is part of the front end of everything. And then you have all the environmental aspects that go into monitoring and making sure that the pipeline right away is not impacting in a negative way. And then you have the consultation part, both at the project stage and in the life cycle of the project. So it's not like a black box once it's done. Well, I'll kind of reframe that question a little bit. What pipelines over the past, say, 5 years have been on the table? So I would say in the past, no less than 10 years, we've had major pipeline projects that were proposed. And then I'll talk about where we are today. So we had Northern Gateway, which was a pipeline across BC to move oil to the West Coast. We had Energy East was another pipeline to move oil to the East Coast. We had KXL that was going to expand and move oil down to the Gulf Coast. All three of those projects spent a decade going through what I just described as how you get a pipeline project going forward. And they've been denied, withdrawn, and that's a real loss to the Canadian economy and to supplying responsible energy to North America and the world. What we have in flight today is on the gas side, the Coastal Gas Link, which is moving gas from Alberta and BC to the West Coast to the Canada LNG project. And then we have the Trans Mountain Expansion project. So we had at one time 5 or 6 major infrastructure projects, and we're struggling to get 2 completed right now. And I would say the third thing that's really on the table is Line 5. That moves product and liquids from Western Canada down into the U.S. and up into Ontario. There's a piece of pipe that goes under Straits of Mackinac, and it's being replaced, but it's being challenged to be shut down by the governor. A lot of this stuff is highly political and highly positioning. But Enbridge has run that pipeline for a long time. They're going to build a tunnel to not have it go along the bottom of the lake, and it's essential energy to Eastern Canada. And so those are the things that are on the table. The other one is that on the gas side, on the gas gathering system into the transmission pipelines, that the access is being increased and improved so that the gas producers can access the markets more readily and be there when the demand is there. Very, very good question, and a very critical question. Indigenous relations have, really, with you've probably heard a term called UNDRIP, UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which the government is implementing. And I go back to what I said before. One of the key things is consultation, engagement, and ensuring that there's participation by Indigenous groups along any kind of infrastructure project. So right from each company's perspective and from an industry perspective, that consultation, that engagement, that drive to get Indigenous involvement in the projects to get the economic benefits. And Coastal GasLink's case, they have agreements with the Indigenous groups across the pipeline. This ongoing issue is more that the traditional leaders of one particular Indigenous group say they didn't approve anything, and they have the right to say yes or no, whereas the elected officials of the Indigenous groups, who have it's their purview to decide on these things, have agreed to it. So this whole issue gets very nuanced, and it gets very emotional, and it gets very political. But I, take it for what it's worth. This industry is absolutely engaged on the Indigenous, getting the benefits and the jobs and the revenue into these communities from these projects. In Trans Mountain expansion case, the government bought that pipeline. It will be somebody else will buy it once it's operating, and there will be a big Indigenous component of that ownership. So this industry is actually key to Indigenous communities generating wealth and opportunity. and the industry is open to it.
Certainly, and for anybody who's more interested in learning about Indigenous involvement in resources, a lot of our colleagues work with the Indigenous Resource Network. So there's
Yes.
definitely an opportunity to go and interact and meet with people who have all sorts of opinions about natural resource development. It is
Yeah.
really, really fascinating work.
The industry is evolving a lot, and the old way of doing things, or I say the way we've been doing things, is changing. And as I said before, these companies are very much engaged on much more. It used to be 10, 15 years ago, it was all about integrity and safety and so on. It's matured and evolved so much over that time. And all the other issues have been compounding. All the things we mentioned, put it under the heading of ESG. So these companies are looking at it from the point of view of, we know how to run these things, we know how to build these things, we're well regulated and so on. We are considered safe, but the real issue is, how does this industry continue to operate? How does it attract investors? How does it move into the hydrogen space, the CCUS space? How does it get into renewable energy resources? These companies are really looking at those things. So I think at some point there will be different incarnations of things, but it'll be more focused on really the companies looking after their brand and moving forward and changing their business models going forward. So change is a healthy thing. And I think this is probably will lead to, I think, a very different way of engaging and advocating and communicating within the pipeline industry that I think, quite frankly, could be more effective.